In northwest England, and just on Wales's doorstep, is Cheshire, a county with much more going for it than cheese, grinning cats and overpaid footballers. But what are its prettiest towns? To establish this, I visited them all personally, and my conclusions are presented to you in this top 10 list. As per the rules of this series, cities are included for consideration, which adds one to the shortlist. However, villages are not, as there are just too many of them. So let's get straight to it. Number 10. We're starting this list as we mean to go on, with a forest load of timber-framed buildings, in this case from the town of Northwich. Where is Northwich? Well, I could tell you that it's just north of Middlewich, and I wouldn't even be taking the mickey. In fact, Middlewich missed out on a spot here by the finest of margins, but a copious amount of black and white buildings does just enough to secure a place for Northwich. Are these real Tudor buildings? Well, no, but they have an interesting backstory nevertheless, originating typically from the late 19th century as a practical solution to the subsidence issues stemming from the salt mining that had taken place here since the Roman era. Number 9. Now to the Wirral Peninsula, and one of the few towns from here that wasn't snapped up by Merseyside in 1974, Neston. While this town may appear on the surface as an oasis of calm amidst towns and cities shaped by busy portside trading, Neston once had a thriving port of its own rivalling nearby Liverpool prior to the silting up of the River Dee. Coal mining was also once big business here. Today, though, it serves as a gateway to the Wirral Way, one of England's popular, albeit lesser known, walking and cycling spots. Number 8. Next we head just east of the Wirral, but still within the land of the Woolleybacks. To any Scousers watching, by all means weigh in on that one in the comments if you like. Here's Frodsham. Overlooking the Mersey estuary, at a point renowned for some of the heaviest of heavy industries, this may seem like an unusual setting for a pretty town. Nevertheless, Frodsham boasts some of the most architecturally cohesive streets you could hope for, as well as a railway station that actually drops you off in the very centre of town for a change. Even if the train announcements come first in Welsh, but that's par for the course in much of Cheshire, and indeed Shropshire and Herefordshire. Croeso I Frodsham indeed. Number 7. Our next entry is a place going by the nickname Beartown, otherwise known as Congleton. So legend has it that somewhere around the 16th or 17th century, bear baiting was a popular sport in the town, so much so that the townsfolk set aside funds intended for the purchase of a new Bible and misappropriated them towards the purchase of a bear instead. And so originated the rhyming lament, Congleton rare, sold the Bible to buy a bear. But aside from all that, there's more to this town than a grisly pastime of old, so bear with me here. And yes, these puns are unbearable. Okay, that was the last one. On a serious note, the town council is active in supporting bear rescue charities, so the nickname is intended more as a penance than a glorification. As for its industrial past, well, the streets of Congleton speak to the erstwhile prosperity of the silk trade that began here in the mid-18th century, but eventually fell into decline from around the mid-19th century when a free trade agreement with France left the homegrown produce in an uphill battle to compete. So, in the end, the silk merchants found that the cupboards were bare of. Number 6. When it comes to silk, though, one English town springs to mind more so than any other, and that town is Congleton's neighbour, Macclesfield. Situated at the western fringe of the Peak District, Macclesfield's haphazard streets feature some interesting contours, most notably so on one particular street-cum-staircase, going by the very literal name 108 Steps. Great for fitness fanatics, perhaps less so for others, but the views from the top are almost as sublime as the very fabric that shapes this town, and a fitting site for what some might call the spiritual western terminus of the Silk Road. Number 5. Now to a town whose name derives from Old English for King Canute's River crossing, Knutsford. You may have heard the term Golden Triangle used in relation to Cheshire. This refers to an area of the northern end of the county that's located conveniently as a commuter base for footballers at some of England's top clubs. And Man United, Knutsford may technically fall outside of the triangle by a few miles, but is nevertheless a sought-after home for practitioners of the beautiful game. As such, it is one of the most expensive towns in the north of England. So you can expect to see its historic streets lined with flash cars. Good news for the petrol heads perhaps, but less so for the everyday pedestrian who has to perform what I'd call the Range Rover shuffle. But all things considered, there's no denying the visual charm of these bunting-laden streets. Number 4. Just a short drive from Knutsford down the M6 southbound is our next entry, Sandbach. Here's another town with a wealth of architectural heritage, including the 15th century parish church of St Mary and the old hall from the 17th century, former residence of the lords of the manor of Sandbach, and now a pub. But it's the cobbled market square and its adjacent side streets that give Sandbach the feel of a step back in time, as you're surrounded by buildings from the Georgian era or earlier, with something much older still at the centre, 2 Saxon crosses from the 9th century, allegedly commemorating the introduction of Christianity into the kingdom of Mercia. Once the subject of attack from Vandal Puritans in the 17th century, these have since been given the protection of Grade 1 listed status, which they surely deserve. Number 3. Now, if the earlier entry of Macclesfield wasn't Peak Districty enough for you, allow me to introduce you to its neighbour, Bollington. Here we have a place transformed by the Industrial Revolution from a small village into, well, a small town. On account of the River Dean and its course through the surrounding hills, this was a prime location for watermills that would power various cotton factories. And where there are factories, there tend to be nearby workers' cottages, which in this case provide a showcase of locally quarried Peak District sandstone of impeccable masonry, all amidst an area with a close-knit community feel to this day. One of the county's hidden gems without a doubt. Number 2. For our runner-up spot, we head to a town which, much like Northwich seen earlier, has about 2,000 years of salt production to its name, Nantwich. In 1583, a great fire broke out in Nantwich, destroying around 150 houses. This being the height of the Elizabethan era, the subsequent rebuilding, with funds from Elizabeth I herself, has left the town of today with a hearty dose of late Tudor architecture. Precautionary measures against the spread of future fires included reducing the use of thatched roofs, but stopped short of banning the iconic timber frames in the way London did in the following century, following its own incendiary incident. But this is more than just a bunch of pretty buildings. Everything about Nantwich seems inviting, from the hanging basket-laden station and streets to the characterful independent shops. Heck, even the replica town pillory looks surprisingly pleasant. All of which hints at a degree of civic pride that's sadly lacking in a certain neighbouring town with a big railway station. If you know, you know. But suffice it to say that Nantwich is a town that is certainly worth its salt. Number 1. And to reiterate that I do include cities for consideration, so no prizes for guessing that the top spot here goes to Chester. So much is made of the Roman contribution to Chester, or Diva Victrix as they called it, which includes its street layout and city walls, but to give them the credit for these walkable walls is to do a disservice to all those who enhanced them, including the Anglo-Saxons, Normans, Stuarts, Georgians, not to mention the Victorians who promoted Chester as a tourist attraction and built many of the timber-framed buildings here, often mistaken for Tudor in origin. That said, there are some genuine Tudor and medieval edifices lurking in the midst. A walk atop the walls is in itself a walking tour of Chester, along which you'll come across the cathedral, formerly an abbey church prior to the Reformation, the Norman castle, and even Britain's oldest racecourse. Then you have a unique shopping experience in the form of the Chester Rows, a series of covered walkways at first floor level, harking back to the medieval era, albeit with Victorian restoration, but nevertheless hinting at the historic prosperity of not only Chester, but our subject matter as a whole, the County Palatine of Cheshire, as it was once known, in reference to a degree of autonomy it had over the Crown, lasting for several centuries, and whose legacy is very much evident to this day. On which note we conclude this list of prettiest towns stroke cities in Cheshire. Do you agree or disagree with my picks? By all means let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you'd like to catch up with other counties covered in this series so far, check out the link on the screen now. Thanks for watching and have a great day.